Hi everybody, my name is Robert Morgan. Canada, as everybody well knows, that it's a multi-ethnic country. We have people from everywhere in the world, from all continents, from all races, from everywhere, like multi-ethnic. It's basically everybody could come to Canada. When I first came to Canada, our Coptic community was basically very small. Our Coptic church, St. Mark, was in Montreal, was just starting. It's been here now for 50 years. In its beginnings, there were very few Copts in Canada. Yes, there were other Orthodox faiths, like the Greeks, like the Russians, like the Ukrainian Orthodox, but there was no Coptic churches. Now, with God's grace, we have around 5 to 6 Coptic churches in and around Montreal. Our numbers have increased tremendously due to several reasons. As everybody might know, Canada is a very accepting country. The community is very accepting to foreigners. Actually, being attached to your church is very important here in Canada. One of the things that I found that was very disturbing is that because Egyptians have not been here in Canada for long, the first generations, yes, they know about Egypt, they're very attached, they have maybe extended family or they have immediate family in Egypt. But as you go further and have kids here in Canada that have not been born in Egypt, the second and third generations will and do move away from the culture, and they have basically nothing to do with their home country and their homeland. It becomes sort of diluted down and a very far idea in their head. There is no real attachment to Egypt. Currently, there is about 1 million Egyptians, Copts, I think, around the world. A few hundred thousands here in Canada, at least, have immigrated here since, I would say, the 50s. Quite a large Coptic community with so many churches and that have adopted the Coptic culture, the Coptic language. A lot of people that teach Coptic here in Canada. But still, it's a struggle to keep our identity in the middle of all what's happening, in the middle of all these ethnicities that they do not try to force ethnicities upon you, but there is nevertheless a struggle that you keep your own identity in a foreign country. As an Egyptian that I've come here since a very young age, I found that Egyptians tend to adopt and adapt easily, and in a very short time they become more and more Canadians or Canadian-like. Mind you, it's a good thing, and it's very acceptable here in Canada. But at the same time, it takes away from our own culture and our own ethnicity. We have a lot to be proud of. We have a lot to teach the world and to educate Canadians about our own heritage, our own culture, our own ethnicity, our own traditions. We are very blessed to be Egyptian and to be Copts. The Coptic Church is basically what's preserved our identity for most of the time, for so many centuries. In the face of so many adversities and in the face of so much turmoil that is going on in our own homeland, our church is the sole bastion, you might call it, the sole place that you could go and find your own culture and identify with your own culture and ethnicity and background and tradition. It has kept our tradition for so many years and so many centuries, unadulterated and undiluted and pure. It does the same thing here in Canada. Coptic Church is actually very strong and viable here in Canada, represented mostly in, I'm talking about Eastern Canada, I have not seen Western Canada, but basically on Ontario and Quebec and most of the Eastern provinces, it's very well represented with a very healthy number of Copts. The culture is surviving well because most of the people that are here now are first generation, newly arrived here in Canada. Our second generation have basically lost the Arabic language for most part. That doesn't take away from our Coptic culture and our Coptic faith and our Coptic traditions. But since in Egypt we don't speak the Coptic language, it is very difficult for the second generation to identify with the culture and the traditions of the Coptic people as the first generation. That got me thinking a lot about trying to preserve this culture, trying to preserve the knowledge, the tradition, the history of our own culture, which got me basically to pushed me more to think about this issue, which is for me and for so many of my generation a very important issue of preserving this culture. What I came up with is, since I was blessed with the idea of being able to do research and to come up with answers for so many questions, to dig more into the history of our church, and Church of Egypt, and the Church of Egypt, the Coptic Church, and the history of Egypt itself, which basically is our history, which led me to the idea of writing a book about our history from our perspective, from the Coptic perspective, from the church perspective. That project took me a long time to think about and to put actually in effect. I started way back when I didn't have the time to dedicate for that project, and the actual project started for 5 years. I completed the book. It was published late last year. It's about the history of the Coptic Orthodox people and the Church of Egypt. It's a very, I would say, easy book to read. It is not specifically for the specialized, but it's for everybody. It depends what you're looking for and how you read the book. It is divided chronologically, basically per century. Each chapter is a century, and it speaks about us. It speaks about the Coptic culture, the Coptic history, the Church of Egypt, Egypt in general, the history of the country itself, and the history of the people, where we came from, how we became Christians, why we became Christians, how we persisted till today as Christians in Egypt and outside of Egypt. What are we facing in terms of problems, and what do we represent in the world? Our traditions, our cultures, our background, our church, the culture, the language, everything is there. How we were governed, by whom we were governed in every century, our popes, our leaders, our saints, everything that I could put together basically from so many references from so many people that have written before me about this subject. In English, there are not that many resources. What I found was very few and far in between. The books that were written basically 2 centuries ago. In the late 1800s, there was a book. In history, you try to put together what you can find, basically from manuscripts, from previous historians, from previous church historians that have put together all their experience and all the writings. One thing that I try to represent in this book is that to be impartial as much as possible, to be neutral as much as possible, but bear in mind that history is always written by the conquerors and never by the people who are conquered. Unfortunately for our culture, unfortunately for our church, we were never interested in being conquerors. We were never interested in being the aggressors. Copts are very pacifist. We exist peacefully, basically in Egypt and outside of Egypt. We were never implicated in any conflict against anybody since the dawn of time. We were always peacekeepers. Egypt was invaded by almost all the empires that existed since the inception of Christianity. The book starts from a bit before Christianity, from 30 BC, and continues till the present date. It includes all the different eras that passed on Egypt, all the people that governed Egypt and had any influence on the people and the culture and the church and the Egyptian people in general. So this is an introduction to basically the book that I wrote in the past few years, and we will continue in the next episode. Thank you.